Well, I'm Don Westendorp. I went to art school, went to Savannah College of Art and Design for video game design back in the day, like 2004. Wound up dropping out, wound up in software development for 10, 15 years, and now I'm giving game dev a real shot again. We started with writing what we know, which is software development. So we didn't have to come out. There's enough interesting stories that aren't being told about what tech workers have to go through every day and the general like problems with the industry and how we're like all contributing to the decline of society. So we're exploring the fun side of that. My title, right? I'm the game director is what we're titling me.
So Don's a game director. I am creative director at Unhinged Studios. My name is Del Sherritt. I guess we're doing backgrounds since Don's taking the lead on that. I come from a similar background, like went to an art school, dropped out, wanted to go into video games or at least some kind of like, I don't know, digital medium anyways. And I didn't think I'd have the opportunity again, but then I ran into Don. So yeah, making a game.
I feel like I'm going to try really hard to keep the focus on your game and not get into the philosophical, aspect of of the internet and culture and all that stuff. It does tie into your game, but it's going to be hard because I agree with everything both of you said about art school and the current society and how we view things. But let's talk a little about like Dev Hell. This is a parody game, right? So where did the idea for this game come from originally? You kind of already mentioned that it's from your real life experiences, probably Dell's too.
The idea started in about 2019. I was in the middle of a meeting and we were just looking at Jira and I had just played Papers, Please. And I was just like, what if I made a game that was like Papers, Please, but it was Jira? And you're just like trying to make sure all the tickets were right before they could move along. That joke kind of morphed into the first version of this game from way back then that is never going to see the light of day, where like it was going to be like a team management simulator where like still going to be like a roguelike deck builder and like your teammates were decks and like they would all play cards and then you would play cards against their cards to try and make it so your team didn't suck and like get them drag them kicking and screaming to success. And then the pandemic hit. This is around the time I met Dell and brought them in on the idea, and we're like working on it. Pandemic hit, like this doesn't make sense anymore. Tried to make a different game, realized the scope was getting way too big. And then like we took all the frameworks and everything we built for that game, plus the like gameplay mechanics we already had for Dev Hell 1.0 and came up with what this one is, which kind of started with the idea of like, what can we build? I like Inscription. Like, what if we were doing Inscription and instead of like the other guy, it was Elon Musk and like you were trying to like keep your job by proving to them how salient your code is. And you know, that wasn't enough of a game idea, but it let us start extrapolating out of like, here's how we can actually build it.
I think the only thing I'll contribute is that we went through a lot of different, processes through deciding like what format we wanted to present this information in, because ideally I wanted to tell a little bit more story with it. Originally our characters didn't really have like dialogue or personalities, or like there wasn't really a plot, but you know, we realized there was a lot of interesting things to say about the tech industry, and like I think that tech has been coming more and more to the forefront recently anyways. There's a lot of good and bad things coming out of it, just to say the least. So I think that where we eventually landed was the like best format, given the first person kind of perspective to tell a more immersive story and like give more personality to the world and the characters.
Yeah, the people who consume video games, I think the most of them, not gonna say all, but like a lot of them don't understand the intricacies and like what it goes into, right? Like, and I spend a lot of time on the internet, you guys probably do too, and it's just horrendous. And I think all comedy stems from tragedy. That's what it is. Like, I mean, the most famous comedians have the most tragic backstories, right? And I feel like your Dev Hell game is so funny, and I can't help but think about like how much real life experience personally did you two put into Dev Hell to make it so funny? Like it's almost like so dark it's funny. It's just it's terrible to laugh at it.
That's pretty much the goal. Is it like, this isn't us like trying to be like, oh boo-hoo, working in tech is so hard. It's tech isn't what you think it is, and it's not like good. It's not, there's like some mundanity to the evilness of the whole system of let's get 12 really smart people in a room and figure out how to like keep kids on the internet 3% longer, engage them with algorithms, and like forget all about the human side of like what these KPIs mean and like just ruin everything. It just is this whole large system that just does that. And we've been inside of it and we're like, here's what actually goes on in there.
It's a dark enough thing, but like it's also, Dawn said, very mundane, and like the nature of kind of like the impact that you have in that space. It's weird that that translates to something funny, but it's just like so self-important that it's easy to really pose how absurd it is. Office spaces are beyond boring. I think we all know that. Even for the people who like have not worked in tech, there's a lot of like familiarity to the space that we're creating, and like a lot of comedy in it is stemming from like things that people can relate to if they've ever worked in a corporate space at all. So
I hated working in an office environment. I've only done it a handful of times, but I mean, getting up every day, sitting in traffic to go, 10 miles, and then getting into the thing, getting late and having someone mention you were 5 minutes late. Like it's so awful. And I thought we almost got rid of it, but like, and now everyone's like, oh, revenue's going down. Everyone has to go back in the office now because clearly the problem is work at home and not other things happening. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. So let's talk about
that's one of the reasons we went back to like, oh, we can do this, because we're like, oh, maybe working from home is actually going to be permanent, and like this whole concept of having the office and everything is just going to be like too soon to like be culturally relevant again. Like it would be too soon for it to be nostalgic, and like it's like, I bet if we wait a year, they're going to change their mind. So
that worked out.
It did. So let's. I don't want to get, like I said, I'm trying to keep this on track because your game says so much politically and like socially. So talk about the mechanics in Dev Hell. You play a game developer, and it's like a deck building roguelike experience. Talk a little about the mechanics.
You're technically a software developer, but you're working on amorphous things that you learn a little bit more about as you go through it. The mechanics are based around the idea of the biggest difference is there's two numbers on the card, and it's not just health and damage, it's code and influence, and either number can remove the card. So if either number goes to -1, the card comes off the board. So you have to balance your reputation, which is influenced by influence, which goes up and down, and that's what gets you fired, versus code, which makes the game generally easier to do if you do a lot of code. But you don't necessarily have to do code, you just have to not get fired. So we've made it so there's a lot of interesting ways to build in the actual deck builder to get through the game in very specific ways.
So that's your deck building aspect and mechanics about the influence. And you have like, there's a lot of hilarious things. Like when you do fail the game, it's, we need to speak, and then it's, you're fired, we're going in a different direction. Like there's so much like dark humor. I've never worked in a game dev environment, but I'm a journalist and I've interviewed a lot of devs. So I'm familiar with the process and the work environment. And you guys have nailed that aspect. Was there any concern of it being like too real or like too accurate when you were designing the tone of the game?
I've worried about that because like we want it to first and foremost actually be fun and engaging to play. Maybe not, well, we want it to be fun. Maybe it might be sad, but you can have fun while being sad. Yeah, with the You're Fired screen was definitely inspired by Dark Souls too. So we're like kind of like, oh, it's Dev Souls. The original thing had it like fading out to black and white with like the You're Fired. We wanted it to be a little bit faster and not too dramatic because like I've been laid off several times now in my life and it just sucks. And like I don't want to make people have to re-experience that over and over, but also that's what happened. So it's been kind of a juggling act in that regard.
For what it's worth, we're definitely trying to make it more real feeling. We're not necessarily shying away from that, but it's one of those things where we're hoping that like, the satire and the comedy angle of it make it, easier to digest, a little bit more palatable.
I feel like there's a good balance of like, if you can educate and entertain at the same time, like that's amazing. Like if you can accomplish those two things, like I think the Barbie movie did that extremely well. I think South Park does that well. Like they're educating and entertaining at the same time. And I feel like your game, as far as tone, because I haven't gotten to play it yet, does that. I feel like your game does that. It's still a fun card game with all these little, here's how these meetings work, and here's how the boss talks to you, here's how the project manager works with you. And it's just, it's what kind of gaming dev space did you base the tone on? Was it AAA, indie, everything in between?
It's actually based on like an agency software development place that's making phone apps. It's a type of developer where you get contract work and you do it like on spec for a different client. So like a big part of the framing is that you're building the software for a client that like the company isn't really being transparent about with you who they actually are, and like what you're building seems pretty nefarious. And a big part of the game is kind of delving into exactly what that is and what's going on.
Can you beat your game? Is there a way to actually beat the game, or is there no winning in this game?
Eventually you can win, but it's like, it's an open-ended one. And as a roguelike, there's a true ending that you have to get to once you've beat it a couple of times. And just kind of like the tone and the nature of it changes. The ending isn't different, but what you know may develop a little bit further. The information that is presented and like the world and like the office as you understand it, the company evolve a little bit.
Yeah, it develops kind of like how Hades does, where each run you'll get a little bit more and more into the narrative, but there's also the ability to go off into like side quests that affect the way your deck plays, but also like gets you into a narrative space. So like if you get closer to a particular character, you might get a specific set of tasks to do for them, and if you do it, you'll get a specific card and you'll get a specific like set of story.
Now you mentioned like, you know, your roguelike elements in like Dark Souls, but what other games did you pull inspiration from, like other roguelites, like card games?
I mean, Inscription was like the founding like thought of like how we could do a card game in first person and present it and have people actually like it. And Grifflands was kind of like the narrative inspiration for it. So like Inscription plus Grifflands is usually the way we just tell somebody that's played a lot of card games, like, this is what we're doing. It's got a lot of story and it's got, you're there in real life and you can play through it. Magic the Gathering is kind of the inspiration for some of the mechanics on the deck building side, because we want the deck to feel a lot more like a resource driven system. So like you have a limited amount of turns to play, you have a limited amount of cards. One of the earliest things we're seeing now is that people are running out of cards too soon, so we need to like amp up how well we're teaching, like you have to be careful the way you play your cards, because you can just run out of things to do as a dev and just be kind of stuck there. Like, so you have to make sure you're applying the right solution to the right problem, and that's kind of what we're trying to simulate with it. And Magic is like that too. Like if you were able to just take your 8 best cards to Magic and play them and then just reshuffle them and play them again, it wouldn't be as fun.
Yeah, the turn one wins are never fun to play against. Yeah. They're fun to play, but not play against.
And like that's the other side of it, is we also don't have like the turn one, like just run your combo and you win. You generally have an amount of turns, but the game is putting the pressure on you in order to like meet your objectives. There's never enough turns for how many things you need to get done. But
the infamous triangle, right? You have time, money, and or is it time? Yeah, quality. You pick 2, right? That's the classic business thing that nobody ever pays attention to.
Yeah, we're very much pushing for, you always have to make a sacrifice in some regard. Like if you want to be really good at code, you're going to be open to like criticism, which has definitely happened to me in my life, where I've gotten in trouble even though I did my job well, which is a thing we're simulating that you have to balance.
Dale, as the creative director, is it hard balancing the gameplay elements with like the story elements to make sure that they're equally getting attention and not swaying too much in one side or the other?
Yeah, that's something that we've had to work really hard to dial in. I think that we had to figure out how much dialogue was like appropriate, even because, you know, we present like dialogue kind of line by line, and we had to make sure that like we weren't overloading the player, because like, you know, ultimately you are playing a deck builder and you do want to get back to the game, but like, you know, making sure that like the story we're telling is like very concise, but also just kind of like foreshadowed by things that seem kind of mundane. So introducing the story kind of slowly but more thematically, I guess, like at least from the beginning, because we kind of want to get deeper and deeper the further you get in the game, where it gets a little bit more ham-fisted. But like to start, it's more of just kind of that like, this is the flavors of something dark. But yeah, balancing that with the card game has been an interesting process.
What do you folks think is the biggest misconception from a consumer looking at game dev in general?
One of the problems with the whole industry in general is that the profit margins for game dev have been coming from unpaid overtime. So like, and like these giant companies have built, we're exploring that here too. Like they've built these structures where like not a lot can get done for a lot of money. People are like, why aren't my games better? There's 800 people working on this, but like they've organized it in such a way that it's expensive, and it relied on all of those people doing extra work all the time. The company mistreats them, they all quit. It's a snowballing effect that's like adversely, I mean, in AAA space is definitely hurt most of those large games. And we're seeing like people like us can come in and build something a lot faster and leaner, but there's like this huge gap between like way too big and like small with very limited resources, and nobody's really meeting that in the middle. Because like once you start making a bunch of money, people are like, oh, you made $1 million, how about you make 100? Because there's no in between. Like either you can make like a nice living wage, or you have to be making $1 billion. And like I think that adversely affects like this interesting scope where games could actually be, where they could spend like $5 million on a game, make something really strong. Like Hades is basically an example of this. Like that's, I don't know what their budget is, but like that's about what they're doing with 10, 20 people and building like a really solid game in that range. And I think that would be great for consumers. Like if we could actually scope the games to the size of the player base and like be really intelligent about how we use our resources to just make good games for them, because like the whole industry is set up now that if you make a good game, people are most likely going to play it.
I think the amount of work that's going in for sure, and like the fact that there is that much crunch, that like there usually are really like just awful deadlines for things that people have to, you know, and this is one of the things that we're trying to get at in the game too, is that like, you know, like working as a developer, just in any field where you have to build something tech or like media wise, you're very prone to just being kind of like objectified. Like you just have to get as much work done as possible, and like the human element and the like humane treatment can be stripped out of it a little bit. Like, that's probably all I have to add though.
It's definitely, it's a balancing act I don't think a lot of companies do, which is like there is a business side of it, right? The game has to make money in order to pay its people, but there's also a creative side of it, and it doesn't, if it swings one way too hard, a game can suffer, right? There's no management at all and it's completely creative freedom, Daikatana. Or if it goes like the complete other direction, right, where it's just like, you know, like Fortnite, which became this like behemoth, like algorithmic child psychology money machine, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just, it's wild to me. But what do you, so sorry, I'm trying really hard to keep this focused because I feel both of you and I feel both of your pain in terms of like freelancing and contracting in the business. But what do you hope people will get out of Dev Hell if they play it? Dom, we'll start with you.
The biggest thing I want people to understand is that coding is the easiest part of the job. It's the people that are the problem. That's been one of my mottos for most of my life, and we really wanted to show that, is that like there's a conception that developers just go in and code all day, and it's more like developers go in and try and figure out what they're coding all day
and make sure that everyone's happy.
Well, they try.
Yeah, exactly. It's the effort that counts. Hopefully, ideally, I think we want to get across that it's kind of a commentary on just like being involved in systems in any capacity that exploit or take advantage of people, that like by being a part of them, you're kind of reinforcing it or being complacent. Like that's something that's gonna be surfaced like more and more throughout the game. But the real thing that like I would like to push in the game is that like, you know, you can be the corporate drone that just keeps your head down and does their job and like, you know, doesn't really pay too much attention or ask too many questions about what you're doing, but you're not really going to be like fully engaging with like the reality that you're actually in, or like the implications of the work that you're doing. So like being willing to ask more questions, because we're treating a lot of the gameplay like, you know, you can do your job, but you can also do your job and like be aware of the environment and the people that are surrounding you, and how are you going to engage with those two things and balance them. Something that I think, or I'm hoping that people will take something away from.
And then my last question is, when does your game come out and what platforms are you aiming for at launch?
So specific release date is sometime after Next Fest, but before the next Fest. We don't have a concrete time for that yet, but that's like late Q2, early Q3. June 10th to 17th is the next Fest. Platform, it's just we're only gonna do on PC, on Steam. We're gonna keep it really straightforward to make sure we can do this. And then if it works out, then we're gonna see what we can do to push it to other places that people would like to play it.
Yeah, I feel like this game would do really well on tablets.
We have tested it on the Steam Deck. It does run and it's good. Like it runs at a good frame rate. Everything works. It's just not optimized for the format yet. So like that is a thing we're probably going to pivot towards as we see demand for it there.
And then where can people find more information about Dev Hell? You guys have a Discord, website, Steam page, all that good stuff?
Yeah, Steam page, Discord. There's a link to the Discord on the Steam page. There's a link to the Discord in the press kit. That's the main places we're interacting with people. We're generally eschewing social media for now, but we might get something spun up there too.